I was an unusual medical student back in Guadalajara. I wasn't the best and I wasn't the brightest, but I was diligent. I completed everything as if I just had one shot, and I didn't take anything for granted. I really impressed one of my professors with my work ethic, so much so that I got a personal recommendation to work as an assistant for Dr. Soto. This was years ago. Kind of strange to look back at it like this. Soto was in her early 50s when we first started to work together. She was a grandmother with a tough-as-nails kind of attitude, and I never once heard her come up with an excuse or back away from a challenge. She would either attack a problem until there was no other angle to face, or she would back away and realize someone else had a better shot at it. She was never afraid to put pride aside when it came to finding a solution. If someone knew better than her, she'd recognize it and step aside. So while Dr. Soto is still in the game, you know there is something yet to be done. I followed Dr. Soto out of the university and into the workspace. When she was headhunted by the INDRE, Instituto de Diagnóstico y Referencia Epidemiológicos, she brought me along. She needed someone who could match her diligence, and we'd worked together long enough to understand one another on a personal level. During the first stages of the COVID pandemic, we worked with testing prevention techniques. She also consulted on a panel relating to spread reduction in relation to incubation. There's been a large demand for people in our line of work ever since. While I'm not an epidemiologist, I've worked with plenty, Dr. Soto being the most recognized. And as with everywhere else, experience takes precedence over academics, even in a field like this. While I'll never replace a specialist, I still carry some weight around. So when Dr. Soto was called in on short notice, she brought me along. It was September not too long ago. I got a text message just after midnight, urging me to get ready to leave first thing in the morning. It was in no uncertain terms an emergency, possibly a life or death scenario. Soto texted me that she was pulled in at the last minute with no preparation. "They're getting everyone," she wrote. "It's a national level response." A van pulled up at 3 in the morning. Two armed men knocked on my door, demanded my identification, and escorted me out of the building. I relaxed a little when they apologized about the indiscretion, but I couldn't help but to be a bit rattled. I was taken to an airport, driven straight through security, and escorted onto a plane. Before entering, they took away my cell phone and laptop. There were about 24 other people there, some which I recognized from past lectures and conferences. These were experts and professionals, far above my level. The flight left for Durango at 5 a.m. When we landed, we were ushered onto a bus with little to no fanfare. There were no answers to my questions, or anyone else's for that matter. We were just told that it was a medical emergency and that we all needed to get on site. But just talking amongst ourselves, we figured a couple of things out. People were being called in from all over. There was me and Dr. Soto from INDRE, but there were people from the Secretariat of Health, the Secretariat of Salud, Federal Commission for the Protection Against Sanitary Risk, COFEPRIS, the Mexican Social Security Institute, IMSS, the Secretariat of National Defense, SEDENA, the Civil Defense, PROTECTIONCIVIL, and the Secretariat of Environment and Natural Resources, SEMARNAT. Some were called in to help coordinate response groups, while others were there as experts in their field or as consultants. What was common among us all was our experience in dealing with large-scale containment and quarantine procedures. We went to a small community in the eastern Durango region called Los Azules. This was a rural community that usually had no more than 200 to 300 inhabitants. Most people who lived there alternated between seasonal work in the countryside and more regular work in the big cities, meaning the people living there shifted every 6 months or so. The September rains usually marked the beginning of the off-season, and from what I could glean, this meant that there would be at most around 100 people there. Los Azules is in a somewhat arid environment, not entirely desert, but with infrequent rains, a flat open space with little to no connection to the modern grid. Considering how close it was to the Zona de Silencio, there was a spotty connection, making people rely on antiquated landlines. When we arrived as Los Azules, there were hundreds of people present, military checkpoints, field hospitals, logistic tents. A nearby field had been flattened into a parking space. This was in the middle of nowhere, making everything stand out like a sore thumb. The temporary setup around the village was almost as big as the village itself. We moved past the checkpoints. Armed guards checked the perimeter, reporting every couple of minutes or so. No one was getting in or out, but no one was going close to the village either. Stepping off the bus, I was immediately taken aside by Dr. Soto. I could tell she was stressed. Her graying hair was a mess, and she'd already taken off her jewelry. That meant she was ready to get her hands dirty. I threw a barrage of questions at her, but she could barely hear me over the angry chatter of the other academics. Everyone was upset, but it was hard to tell about what. I caught a couple of stray comments as I was dragged through the makeshift camp, ending up outside a yellow quarantine tent. Soto tapped my chest, pointing to the equipment. "Suit," she said. "We're going in. Now." Equipment checks, procedure walkthrough, decontamination, airlock. We rushed through it. Then there was a moment of silence, a little peace, as just the two of us stepped through the yellow tent. "We count 63 people," Soto said, "all non-responsive." "Unconscious?" I asked her. "Do we know the timeline?" Antibacterial lamps rotated with a sharp hum. I was having trouble adjusting to the suit. It was a bit too large. "About 36 hours," she answered. "No airborne toxins. We're testing for bacterial infection, possibly a virus. Any symptoms?" She shrugged a little, shaking her head. "Maybe paranoia." We followed a dirt path up towards the main buildings, about 24 in total. I could see other people in hazmat suits walking around with testing kits. One of them was wielding a chainsaw, and I could hear someone using one further in. "Some houses are barricaded," Soto explained. "They're still trying to get in." "How many people are unaffected? Do we have any witnesses?" "No witnesses," she continued. "Everyone's affected." "All of them?" "A couple of people were being rolled out on stretchers. I couldn't see any body bags, so at least there were no casualties. Whatever this was, it had a 100% infection rate. It spread through the whole community, and every single person had fallen unconscious." As we started preliminary testing, Soto took a moment to update me. It had started with a call from a worried relative. Local police had initiated a wellness check only to notice the many boarded-up houses. As an ambulance was called in, it was decided to elevate the issue further. Once it was revealed that it wasn't an isolated incident, it was deemed necessary to quarantine the village. A response team was formed from various government agencies, coordinated by a single director and a panel of experts, one of which was Dr. Soto. Nothing could be excluded at that point. The cause could have been anything. Doctors were going house to house, breaking open doors and windows with crowbars and chainsaws. Terrified dogs were put into cages by an animal control team. They'd be tested too. One by one, people were rolled out of their homes and taken to the yellow quarantine tents. Soto and I moved one ourselves. A young man, maybe 17 years old. He was just sitting on the couch, completely unresponsive, holding a stress ball. The tents were filling up. The director had ordered a complete checkup, looking for either a virus or bacteria. If we could eliminate the possibility of an airborne cause, we could relax our security protocols. Soto and I ran tests on the young man. There were no signs of unusual bacteria or a virus. We did notice a heightened level of ketones and stress hormones, mainly epinephrine and cortisol. But that didn't tell us much. Soto and I used what little time we had without even thinking of a break, as we were supposed to present our findings to the director later that evening. After hours of testing and running into wall after wall after wall, Soto and I were staring blankly at an almost empty whiteboard, with only a couple of words hastily scribbled in the corner. Cortisol, ketones, epinephrine. "It's not a coma," she said, "and it's not sleep either." "You don't get stressed by sleeping," I agreed, "but the ketone levels are similar to that of a coma patient." "At a glance, perhaps, but not in context," she sighed. "We're missing something." We were given a government laptop. There was a remote meeting set up with the expert panel and the director. Everyone was to share their working theories. I wasn't originally meant to be in the room, but Dr. Soto needed me to stay informed, so she allowed me to stay just outside the camera. There were a lot of discussions, mostly about what we could and couldn't rule out. We'd found no evidence of a viral or bacterial infection. One team had checked for fungus. One by one, they were all saying the same thing. These people were unresponsive, and there was no clear indication as to why. They were being given saline solutions and treated as coma patients for the time being, but the cause was still unclear. One expert suggested that it was a toxin-induced coma. They'd found trace remains of a cyanobacterial poison in the groundwater, indicating that there might have been a larger than usual algal blooming in the area. Dr. Soto refuted this, saying that the levels were far too low to put a person into a coma. The director argued that what we were measuring might be the aftermath, meaning we were seeing the trace remains rather than the initial dose. This was the official working theory we were going for, but I could tell it wasn't it. Dr. Soto wasn't giving up. There had to be something else. While our main objective was shifting towards antibacterial treatment, Dr. Soto wasn't convinced. We decided to look closer at environmental factors in the patient's home. While Dr. Soto was under close watch and had regular sign-ins every 2 hours, I didn't have that kind of restriction. I could come and go without anyone paying much attention. I brought a notebook and returned to the village. All windows and doors were barricaded from the inside. They'd had to cut the door open with a chainsaw. There was plenty of food in the fridge, and not a lot of trash, showing that the patient hadn't been locked up for long before they lost consciousness. A day at most. There were a lot of things around the community that didn't make a lot of sense. Some people were found holding crucifixes. Others were looking at pictures of their family or past relatives. They gave their pets food and water, had a big meal, and hunkered down. One of the other teams found a notebook with a bunch of scribbles, but it was taken away before I could get a look at it. Most people were found in their beds. Others had been found hiding in closets or cellars. In one of the houses, someone had sprayed the word abandonar across the bedroom wall. It almost seemed religious in context, as if they were preparing for the rapture. They were holding what meant dear to them, feeding their pets, and making peace with their God. What else could cause someone to behave like that? As we came upon the evening of the first day, people were exhausted. The medical team was working around the clock, while the security personnel were on rotation. While waiting for some tests to come back, I caught Dr. Soto nodding in and out of a brief sleep as she studied our patient. He looked so peaceful, in a way, like none of this concerned him. When Soto noticed I was looking, she snapped to attention and pretended like it was nothing. "Spinal fluid," she mumbled. "Did you run the, She trailed off and shook her head. I rolled my eyes. "No, but you did," I answered. "Get some sleep." "I can't," she admitted. "It feels wrong." "You need to be your best," I insisted. "They deserve that." "No, I mean, it really feels wrong," she explained. "Look at him. Did he think he'd end up on our table when he went to sleep?" "That's what we're trying to figure out, right?" She shook her head and retreated to the back of the tent. Still wearing her hazmat, she propped up 2 chairs into a makeshift bed. "1 hour," she sighed. "Just 1 hour." I didn't notice anything at first. I was focusing on staying awake and checking the test results. It was true what the director had said. There were trace amounts of cyanobacterial poison in the patient's bloodstream, but it was close to nothing. It couldn't explain what was happening. There was no fever, no response at all. It was just like, click, lights out. Then I heard something. Dr. Soto was moving in her sleep. Not much, but enough for me to notice. Little twitches and noises. She'd only been asleep for a couple of minutes, but she was already experiencing something uncomfortable. Then again, she was sleeping on 2 chairs. How comfortable could it be? Another couple of minutes passed, and all of a sudden she twitched again. This time violently enough to fall off the chairs. I ran up to her, only to see that she was having some kind of mild seizure. I ran over to one of our red emergency call buttons, pressed it, and hurried back. I put her on her side, making sure she had free airways. It was difficult to see with the suit on, but I could hear her breathing. After a couple of seconds, it passed. By the time help arrived, she was awake and fully aware. She excused it with sleep deprivation, stress, and poor diet. No one dared to question it, but she was to report to a nurse in the morning. Soto agreed. As we were left alone with our patient, she turned to me, red-eyed and shivering. She put her hand on my shoulder. "We both know this is no airborne virus," she said, "so I need you to test me." "Don't be irresponsible," I said. "We can't break protocol." "I've never had a seizure in my life," she snapped back. "Never. And what I felt, I don't know. There was something there, like hearing a breath in the dark." "You could just be sleep deprived," I insisted. "You've been up far too long." "I've worked longer hours under greater pressure," she snarled. "I know what I'm about." She pulled off her hazmat suit and stretched out an arm. I just stared at her, dumbfounded. I wiped down her arm and took some blood for testing as she mumbled about stress hormones. The antibacterial treatment we'd been forced to give to the patient wasn't working, and Soto wasn't about to give up without an answer. She could smell it. There had to be another solution. And as always, she was prepared to go the distance to find it, dragging me along, kicking and screaming. "You find anything strange, anything at all, you tell me immediately," she said, putting her suit back on. "The slightest deviation. Understood?" "Yes." She gave me a pitying smile, as if trying to apologize with her eyes. She knew I was just concerned, but she refused to let that be a hindrance. I made the rounds to some of the other teams to see what they'd found. They hadn't noticed that much. A slightly lowered body temperature was the latest discovery. It had taken some time to notice, as most of the patients had kept themselves under covers or wrapped in blankets as if laying down to sleep. But they did have a slightly lower than average body temperature. One assistant mentioned finding a phone. Apparently, they'd gotten access to it, and there were a couple of videos from one of the residents. Nothing we were allowed to see, though, but she'd heard about it secondhand. "They talked about hallucinations," she said. "They were worried about something coming from the zone, magnetic fields, something abnormal." Zona de silencio. The silent zone is infamous for many strange occurrences: cell phone signals being interrupted and garbled, GPS, satellite connections. Electronics were often said to be at risk in that area. While Los Azules was on the outskirts of the zone, it was still considered to be part of the general area. We hadn't noticed much disturbance, though, but this would just add to the already plentiful rumors. That was probably the reason they tried to do this operation without bringing too much attention. They didn't want to turn this public health hazard into an international spectacle. That made sense to me. But I was stuck on the same line of thought as Dr. Soto, that this wasn't a toxin-induced coma. There would have been more indicators. But then again, there wasn't that much else to go on. So after much internal debate and double-checking that our patient was stable, I decided to decontaminate and get some sleep. There was a tent just outside the quarantine area where non-security personnel were allowed to rest. I was asleep the moment my head hit the pillow, but sleeping barely brought me any rest. I experienced something. It wasn't really a nightmare, but more like a memory. I had this feeling of looking up at the sky, only to see it looking back. It searched for me, and when it found me, it called out. To what, I couldn't tell, but something heard it, and something was waiting to obey. I could feel movement out there, dragging heavy feet through the sand. Something sharp coming out of the night, cutting the dry petals from the strange blue sunflowers growing amongst the weeds. There was this impression of an eye in the sky. It wasn't looking at my body. It wasn't listening for my words. It was hearing something deeper. Who I was, what I thought, what I dreamed. And this dream in itself was an expression, something for it to hear, and it was listening with ill intent. I woke up in the showers, gasping for air. One of the other assistants had dragged me there and soaked me with cold water. I'd had a seizure, and there was no other help to get. The last few hours had been chaos. A couple of soldiers had fallen into a coma, just like the residents. These people were never even near the quarantine. They patrolled well outside. A secondary quarantine level had been haphazardly established outside, expanding the perimeter further. A whole rotation of personnel were now deemed unsafe and had to stay inside until further notice. I was among them. It was a nightmare, the assistant told me. Some were screaming in their sleep. One of them almost shot their squad leader. 3 people had to be restrained. I think one of them is still locked in the bathroom. They can't get him out. I returned to Soto. I'd tested her but found only traces of what we'd seen in the patient. Some increased levels of stress hormones, but nothing serious. Still, it showed that she was affected. Maybe I was too. Maybe we all were. But Dr. Soto focused on something completely different. Why would he lock himself in the bathroom? She murmured. That doesn't make sense. Maybe he tried to hide, I said. From something. Is that what they're doing? She asked. Is this young man hiding? Just waiting for winter to end, I muttered, curled up and waiting for sunshine. Dr. Soto gave me a curious look, then walked over to her whiteboard. She had an idea. She wrote down all the symptoms: increased ketones, lowered electrolytes, lowered body temperature. Then she wrote down a couple of new things. Have we tested leptin levels? She asked. Yes, I said, rummaging around some paperwork. It says slightly elevated, but that could be a dietary issue. We need to do a protein electrophoresis test, she said. Not a total protein test, just check for one thing. She wrote down HIT on the whiteboard and turned to me. I shrugged. This meant nothing to me. Hibernation induction trigger, she explained. Check for that. Just that. Hibernation, I asked. What? People don't have that kind of protein. Then get a veterinarian out here. Test for it. It's there. She was halfway out the door to call this in when she turned back to me a final time. They're waiting for winter to end, just like you said. While Dr. Soto has had her strange ideas over the years, this was by far the strangest. I was pulled into a call with the director where she explained her idea. There was something environmental that triggered a stress-induced hibernation response, possibly some kind of dormant gene. An outside force was triggering something, causing people to go into hibernation as a stress response, a defense. Of course, it was ridiculous. The director instead concluded that it might be an outbreak of something called SORE, or sudden onset rest event. If so, it was highly contagious, and they needed to keep it in check. They'd already called a specialist from their American colleagues who had more expertise with it, but it didn't make sense. This wasn't something that triggered from people falling asleep. This was something that made people fall unconscious to begin with. They were attacking it from the wrong angle. I hated it, but I had to agree with Dr. Soto. They were looking at it all wrong, and the administered treatment would do more wrong than good. Working on the premise that this was an outbreak of SORE, personnel were administered controlled booster doses to keep them awake. Falling asleep would trigger a violent reaction, in theory. I was given a dose too, and so was Dr. Soto. We didn't take it though. If her theory was correct, these people were listening to some kind of long-lost genetic trigger embedded in our bodies, a natural defense to some kind of phenomenon we were yet to encounter. The following night, this was put to practice. Dr. Soto wasn't given an explicit green light to perform her protein test, but she managed to get a hold of a testing kit anyway and did it herself. While she couldn't positively identify a hibernation induction trigger, she did identify the presence of an unknown protein. This was probably what she was looking for, but she couldn't confirm it yet, but she took it as proof. While Dr. Soto was working on a treatment plan, I decided to check in on the other teams. Most of them were doing okay, but some were showing signs of paranoia. One of the doctors had fallen into the same coma as their patient, ending up on a cot next to them. People were starting to panic. The armed guards who'd been affected were made to surrender their weapons, leaving them exposed and helpless. I saw more than one assistant abandoning their hazmat suit on the floor. What was the point when everyone was already infected? There was a lot of tension in the air. No one knew for sure what was happening, but if the director was correct, this would all pass in about 72 hours or so, as long as we stayed awake. It was late evening, and the September rains were gently patting my shoulder. I was passing through the village, watching the abandoned houses. We'd gone through all there was to discover and left the doors wide open. It looked like a war zone. I felt something passing through me, a shiver like a touchless wind. It froze my heart, making me gasp for air. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I heard cries in the distance. Others had felt it too. Lightning. A bolt struck a tree further out into the field with a deafening blast. And in a split second, the night lit up like the middle of the day. In that one moment, I saw something in the field, something tall with long arms dragging through the sand. I was confused for a second. It felt unreal, like I was still asleep. Maybe I never woke up. Maybe I was in a coma or hibernating like the rest of them. That made sense. As a medical professional, I look for things that make sense. I don't look to the fields backing away from shadows in the sand. But now I did. My instinct was to hide. I ran into the first house I could see and shut the door. I huddled up in the bedroom, right next to the spray-painted abandonar. But unlike the text, I wasn't about to give up anytime soon. I'd keep a low profile and wait. I didn't have to wait for long. I had a plan in mind. I tried to visualize it, but as I did, that icy chill passed through me again. Something akin to a breath or a pulse. Something pushing itself inside my mind, listening to my thoughts. It was reacting to me, feeling me, and looking in my direction. There were footsteps outside, long, slow footsteps. Something heavy. It brushed against the side of the building, easily ripping off a wood panel. It poked and prodded against the barricaded windows. It sounded like someone thrusting a knife at a wooden board, searching for weakness. There were screams in the distance. One in particular stood out. A man yelling a prayer at the top of his lungs. "I see angel," he cried out. "I see angels and I see their ways. I recognize you, blessed saints. I recognize and adore you." Those few words were repeated over and over. Recognize and adore. Recognize and adore. Then those words turned into a foul, shrieking scream. Something grabbed the door handle and slowly pulled. I could hear the hinges snap. There was no hesitation, no struggle. Effortless. I tried to think of an escape, but trying to visualize it made my stomach turn. It's like my sudden thought made a noise, something that it could hear. Now the footsteps were coming my way. One of the back windows was locked from the inside. I clicked it open and heaved myself through. I came crashing down into the sand, but pushed myself up, gasping for air. It was dark, but I looked back anyway. The window was very high up, but I could still see something moving inside. I could only see its shoulders. It must have been crouching to fit in there to begin with. For a moment, we noticed one another, and when we did, I felt something. It's like there was a tap in my mind, spilling my thoughts out the back of my head. I felt like a frightened animal. Conscious thought was giving way to fear, and I could feel it happening by the heartbeat. My pulse beat faster, my skin felt warm, my mouth turned dry, and as I turned to run, something broke through the wall. I only saw it for a split second, at least 3 heads taller than me, covered from head to toe in solid black. Long, sharp fingers, like bones or claws. It had no facial features and it made no noise. But it tore through a wall like it was nothing, sending debris and shrapnel flying. It was just a moment, but it felt like minutes. I could feel the texture of the sand under my fingernails. I could feel it sticking to my sweaty palms. The faint smell of dry vegetation stung my nose and colored the back of my tongue. The image of something I couldn't imagine, standing in front of me, burned into my mind. So I ran. I followed a path down to the first quarantine camp. I have a vague memory of seeing others running in my periphery. The man who'd been praying was being dragged away, leaving a bloody trail in the sand. There were torn tents and I could hear gunfire in the distance. Even then, I was barely paying attention. Something was gaining on me. I was prey. I came back to the first quarantine tent with Dr. Soto and our patient. She was unconscious on the floor with an unmarked syringe next to her. It's not like she'd had a seizure and hurt herself. She'd laid down to sleep. She even had a pillow. I tried to wake her, but there was no point. She was in the same state as the patients. Footsteps approached. I tried to think, but every time I did, I felt that icy chill. I was struggling to hold on to a conscious thought, like a slippery fish. Syringe, I thought. Syringe, syringe, syringe. I looked at what she'd prepared. On one side, there was modafinil, a sort of stimulant. It could probably give me the kick I needed to run for help, but there was also cortisol, effectively a stress hormone. She'd prepared both, and I couldn't think. The footsteps approached. I had to do something. Pick one. But I couldn't make up my mind, and I couldn't think. The lights behind me were blocked out by something moving into the tent. One word came to mind, spray painted on a wall as a last-ditch effort. Maybe they'd tried to tell me the solution all along. Abandonar, give up. I tried to consider my options. I knew the logical thing was to get a boost so I could think. That way I could reason. I could make a plan. I could run for help. The frightened animal in me wanted to do this more than anything else. One shot and I might be good to go. And yet, I took the cortisol. A quick sting, then silence. Instead of the stressful rush I was expecting, I felt a lull. Like the last thought had finally run out of me. There was something in me that gave up, leaving me half-conscious on the floor. I could feel something grabbing my foot, but I didn't care. I'd forgotten that I was even human. My mind was blanking, and all the objects and textures in my sight turned to unrecognizable colors and shapes. I was dissociating. After a moment, it let go of me. It loomed over me like a cloud. I looked past it and up into the open sky, where I saw something. Even then and there, I recognized it. It was something so primal that it went beyond understanding. It's like I'd known it all along but decided to look past it. But there it was, as basic of a concept as a sphere or a square. An eye in the sky. And it turned away. My world turned from colors to darkness as my eyes opened and closed. I could feel my breathing slow down, my hands going numb. The texture of the floor disappeared, leaving me floating in a weightless nothing. Not sleep, but deeper. I dreamt of open fields, of people laying down in deep caves, hoping their dreams wouldn't give them away. People beating thinkers and philosophers, trying to teach their children to be simple. I saw a man burned alive for expressing a thought as terrified people prayed that nothing would hear him. There was something out there, still listening in remote places where people weren't meant to be. And now it was looking for new places. It was expanding, blooming, and the people of Los Azules were the first to feel it in a very, very long time. And then, like the sun sinking below the horizon, my world went cold and dark. I woke up 36 hours later in a field hospital. I'd been administered modafinil. Dr. Soto had argued that this particular neurostimulant would be enough to wake people from their hibernation. Turns out she was right. No need for complicated treatment. One dose was enough. She'd taken cortisol, just like me. The increased hormones were enough to trigger a cascading stress response, just like the people of Los Azules had gone through. It'd been a long shot, but it had rendered us effectively invisible to those things. It was basically a way for us to hit ourselves over the head hard enough to go to a deep sleep, one where we couldn't be seen or heard. Dr. Soto was the first person I saw. She gave me a pat on the shoulder. "Winter's over," she smiled. "Time to get up." That night, a total of 21 people disappeared. They weren't killed, they disappeared. There were a couple of recordings from automated drones showing people being dragged into the dark, kicking and screaming, and they weren't seen again. 2 people died, but these were deemed accidental deaths from crossfire. All 63 people of Los Azules survived, our patient included. The animals were tested and returned to the owners. Sadly, they couldn't go back. The government took ownership of that strip of land, claiming it to be an underground military installation. Of course it isn't. It never was. But the effect lingers, and people who wander can still feel it. There is no way to prevent it, no way to fight it. The best we can hope for is to trust our bodies to effectively play dead. There was an outcry from many of my colleagues, but those cries were silenced. Some had their careers threatened, some were blackmailed. It was clear to both me and Dr. Soto that we had to cooperate, so we did. We went the other way, asking for compensation and mutual understanding. They agreed. We were very generously compensated, and we signed a contract. I've been quiet about this since. It's an enormous discovery waiting to happen, but it can only be studied in this one instance, in these particular circumstances. We have not been able to trigger that same defense mechanism in any other scenario. It needs that specific threat, and we've yet to find it anywhere but in Los Azules. That is, until not too long ago, 2 more instances of sleeping people have been recorded. Once in Sonora and once in Zacatecas. We weren't given specific locations. There were indicators that it might have happened in other places as well, some reports going as far north as the southern United States. Ever since, the director has effectively thrown in the towel. As Dr. Soto put it, you can't contain this. If it happens, it happens. And it looks like it's going to happen a lot more. Our contract has been voided. There might come a time when this hits the news, but for now, they're keeping quiet. Sometimes it's a chemical spill, a gas leak, a virus. There's a lot of names to give something like this. It's just people sleeping longer than usual. Doesn't sound too bad. And the people who disappear, well, who can say for sure? No one knows what happens to them. I can't fathom what we're facing. Something that's been here as long as we have. Does it hate us or love us? Where do we go? I don't understand. And I think that's for the best. Maybe we should have left the thinkers behind long ago. Maybe we should have stayed asleep. Maybe the winter is longer than we thought.